Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Happy, Season 1, Episodes 3 and 4. So, these episodes are like, man, they're really in your face. Not everything about this show is to, of course, be a 100% pleasing thing. There is some kind of content with this show that gets very dork. And I kind of knew about most of this content, or I was to be like, oh yeah, I remember about XYZ thing. And so at some point, this might get someone to possibly turn away from the show, but I'm like, nah, like, oh well, like, it is what it is. And so a lot of people would question tastes and whatever because of a way that this show breaks down is like, huh? Like, but when really looking at this, like, I can still enjoy this show for the shock value that it otherwise provides. And sometimes there's some stuff where a show can be interesting because of its simple shock value. Um, Hence why you go into an episode where it's like, oh my god, they're doing what to a baby, supposedly? They're doing what to this? They're doing, like, we have this one character who's to be in this big, massive bug suit in this episode. What the is going on? And so I can have fun with this show. I can have fun with how wild it gets. So with that said, what's going on in this episode weirdly? So we have kind of a Sax flashback moment in these two episodes where we find out that, of course, Sax was really having an affair with his partner, and it seems that Amanda was wanting to, of course, tell Sax that something is going on at possibly not exactly the best time, or possibly when Sax is to not have the best case on that specific day. So, because eventually Sax is to see the dirty side of the world, which Amanda doesn't exactly get to see until we have her in much more current time finding out how really dark the world really is. So, we also have a visit to this thing called the North Pole in this episode. North Pole, where we, of course, have Sax going to this club of sorts to try and figure out if this evilish Santa Claus, of course, is to be in this bar. And so we have eventually there being a backstory being put together with this evilish Santa Claus. And so I can enjoy that. I can like how we kind of do something interesting here. And like, I also want to try to see here if there is the actual name going on with that character. That, of course, to be the evil Santa Claus. And I'm not finding it here, of course. Because you can't find seemingly anything or everything in this episode. So moving on. So with this episode, we have some kind of fun adventures, and we also have in the fourth episode where we go on and we show more of Mr. Blue's family and how they are going on and dealing with their deaths that are involved in this family. And that's kind of just a lot of that in episode 4. So with that said, because we have one woman in Mr. Blue's family that is going on and doing a reality show, and that takes up quite a big chunk of that episode. So with that said, let's go into that double five time territory because it's about that time yet again to go into this thing called spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time you to spoil this episode. The shock value and shock and awe of this kind of episode where you're just like, whoa, I didn't think I needed to see that. Whoa, all right. It's that kind of episodes, but it is what it is. So let's go into this. Let's go into that spoiler time. Of course, it's still on Netflix. Go ahead and check it out. But without a doubt, let's go into this one. So I'm going to heavily in a very roundabout way talk about this episode, so not everything will be perfectly intertwined with one another. But let's go into it. So let's go into the flashback thing first. So Nick Sachs, of course, was to have this domestic disturbance call that he is to consistently get, where it seems that there is to be a man called Eric Pattinson that I guess is possibly beating on his wife, hence why it's domestic disturbance, whatever. And so Nick, of course, is to go down there with his partner Meredith to kind of put the fear in God into this man, and so we kind of have Meredith that's like having Nick Sachs being put on a leash, like trying to kind of pull him away from all this because it's like, hey man, like we can get in some real trouble if you go on and you talk to this guy. So Nick Sachs goes on and is to make it to this guy's house, and so we have Eric Pattinson who goes on and tells, of course, Nick Sachs, it's like, well, hey man, like you don't know who I am, like I can get your badge removed, and so Nick Sachs is like, well, you know what? If you beat on your wife one more time, like badge or not, like I'm gonna come here and I'm gonna put your head through your butt, and so he's like threatening this guy that he's gonna go and tear him a new one if he doesn't stop beating on this wife. Because we have Eric here who is to have his baby going on and crying, and so Nick and Meredith are kind of watching on as this guy is to basically uh, do a thing of parenting, which is really just shut this baby up kind of thing. So, but we go on and we have Nick intimidating this guy, and then they just walk away because there's not much else that they can do. And so we have both Meredith and Sachs just kind of banging it out. And Meredith is honestly trying to have a conversation with Sachs, but the conversation is very one sided to where like Meredith is going on and like finishing the conversation that they are to have with one another. And she's like, oh yeah, like definitely Nick Sachs. And she's like, yeah, yeah. Like she's trying to like say what his voice is. And so I kind of thought that that was kind of like a funny like non-exchange that she was like trying to be like him to because she like is his partner, so like she can kind of sense what he's going to say here. And Nick Sachs is like, good talk, good talk. So so we have Pamela, who is to supposedly be 7 weeks along, and so she comes to the apartment, and this is still the flashback, and talks to Nick, and is of course to mention, uh, as she's giving Nick this book that he loved, to have them be like ready to talk at some point. And Sax is like, I'm busy. And she's like, I get that, but like, we need to talk. Like, this is an important talk. And so Sax is like, okay, like, I promise that I will go on and we'll have this talk tonight. And so Amanda's like, great. So as Sax's partner is kind of tossing this apple at him, and he eats it, and then she eats it, and Meredith is asking like how like screwed they are, and Nick is just like, I think we're fine. So, but all of a sudden he ends up getting this call because the guy, who of course is to be again hurting his wife, is to be doing this again because there's another domestic disturbance call. So Nick goes on and makes his way back to this place to go on and find out that this guy had uh, gone on and hurt his wife, and then put something else horrifically in a microwave. So we then go on and finally have Nick going to a snapping point, and so we have Nick going and kind of shoving this guy out of this apartment complex, and he's just beating the crap out of him, so much so that he goes on and he shoves this guy's like face next to this stairwell and just starts like beating the crap out of him. I think this guy is to basically almost get beaten to death here. So Meredith is, of course, not really like trying to get Nick off of him. Like, I think she's just like, man, I think this guy really deserves it too, with all that like horrific stuff that we just saw in there. So we go on and we have Nick, who of course is popping popcorn, and he's just like, oh my god, like I don't want to see a microwave for another day or two. But so we have Nick going and popping this popcorn simply to give this to Amanda, who is kind of putting these popcorn like string things on their Christmas tree. And so since Amanda is now home with Nick, she's like, okay, like we should now go on and like talk about what you promised me we were going to talk about. And so Nick is like, okay, what is it? So Amanda, of course, is to say that like, well, what if we like put another stocking onto the mantle of things? And Nick is just like, well, like that would be great. Like uh, put another person in this awful world. Or like he goes on to just say like how bad this world really is, and how Amanda doesn't understand how bad this world is, and how many awful things could happen to this girl when she is inside this kind of world. So, and how Nick has just kind of like really like been dealing with that whole moment that was to of course be that um, baby that was horrifically murdered. So now that that's out of the way, now that we've covered the flashback of things, and how eventually I'm assuming that the relationship with both Sax and Amanda ended simply because of a child. So Amanda is going on with Meredith in this episode, and she's going and trying to find, of course, a number of lost kids' stories to see if there's any connection to them. And so Amanda is to go to this one house and is, of course, talking to, I believe, the Bakers. And so it was Emma and Brent Baker. And so they were talking about how they had lost their kid and so on and so forth. And so Amanda starts thumbing through the room of hers to go on and find out that there is some like kind of secret thing in her closet. And so Amanda is to open this up to go up this stairwell to find out that there's this kind of attic of sorts that all of a sudden has this penny baker inside of it. And so they go on and arrest these parents. And so now Amanda is now asking, of course, Meredith, it's like, well, why go on and have this? Why would they go and report this girl missing if really they knew they were the culprits of all this? And Meredith is like, well, maybe they wanted their 15 minutes of fame. Maybe they just wanted to have some kind of thing that wouldn't like point to them saying that they were in the wrong, and so on and so forth. So maybe they were just to try to like kind of have some kind of loose ends covered here for them. So Meredith is going on and having Mr. Blue call her, and so Meredith is like, well, hey, like, I'm coming up with a different kind of strategy to find Nick Sachs. And so we have Amanda going on and wanting to go and talk to more parents that have lost their children. And so Amanda is to go on and have this one other couple mentioning that they had lost their kid also. And they had mentioned that they were at some Wishies concert. And so it seems that the Wishies song or whatever was playing in the background. And so now, since these parents have lost their kid, they're now just having to memorize that song and play it over and over and in their head like it's on repeat, because that's the last thing that they remember when they had lost their kid. So now that we have that all covered, and so Amanda is to get out of there, and Meredith is kind of like, you know what, like, I don't want to listen to any more of these sob stories. Like, I don't think we're really going to get anything out of this. Like, we're not going to go and find your kid any quicker by going through all of these people. But Amanda's like, well, maybe that's the thing. Maybe that's the connection, that every single one of these kids that have gone missing is because of these Wishy concerts, which is technically right. So we also end up going on and uh, and having both Nick Sachs and Happy going on and driving their way to get where they can possibly figure out furthermore into this Haley case. But it seems that we have Sachs who's ran into some roadblock to where, or not roadblock, but like some traffic. So Nick Sachs just goes on and gets out of his car, whips out his a ling, and goes and starts just peeing in the middle of the street, to where all of a sudden, like, we have this like one family who's like, ah. So like we have the dad that's blocking the kid's eyes from seeing this guy just whip this out and pee. So we go on and we of course have Nick wanting to know what Happy is to know about this guy that they're going after. Like, hey, do you know where he lives at? Like, do you know what he looks like? And Happy is just like, well, no, like, I don't know where he, like, and Nick is like, how do you not know, like, where exactly he's holding these kids? How do you not know what he looks like? Because we have Nick going on eventually, after traffic, I guess, is to clear, to go and find this sketch artist. And so we go on and we find this sketch artist who, of course, goes by the name Emil. And so it seems that this sketch artist was eventually taken off the force because eventually he had started to lose his mind. And eventually the sketches kind of really helped to represent that this guy has lost his noggin, so to speak, sadly enough. So Nick goes on and goes to the sketch artist, and so we of course have uh, Nick wanting Happy to describe what this guy looked like, and so Emil just starts sketching it out, and it seems like this description is heavily vague because Happy's mentioning it's like, well, he looked really ugly, and he was wearing this red suit, and he was this, and he was that, and like and he was like having it be like a combination between these monsterish characters of what this thing looked like, what this guy looked like, and so out of this, like Nick really got nothing out of this sketch artist. And so the drawing of which that was drawn was just this like very dark looking character that he could get nothing out of. So we go on and we have Nick needing to give this sketch artist $20 because he won't do it for free anymore. It's not like some like goodwill or kind of old acquaintance kind of thing. It's like, no, like this will cost you money for me to sketch this. So the sketching of which that isn't exact, it's kind of deformed or morphed or whatever. So we go on in how they continue to figure more and more of this out. We finally come to this consensus that Nick is to realize that this guy is to be wearing a Santa suit. And so now there's an easier figuring out of what they should do next. So we now have it where Nick is to go out of his way to go back to this working girl, so to speak, who is working on slurping down a man's Johnson, so to speak, and she's wearing this weird, bizarrish bear costume because I guess this guy's into that. And so Nick just barges into another session of this woman and is to go on, and Nick is like, well, hey, like whatever you're doing here, just kind of like give me some information. Like I need to know where a lot of guys will be wearing a lot of Santa Claus gear because maybe you still might be into that kind of thing. Because the working girl is to mention that at some point she was to have this weird uncle that wear like Santa Claus clothes all the time, and it weirded her out. So now Nick is to be told by this woman to go off to this place called North Pole. So he of course goes to this club, let's just say, and there of course is to be a bunch of guys that are all dressing up as Santa Claus. So we have Nick who goes to this bartender, and we have the bartender kind of confirming to Nick, it's like, well, hey, like you and me, we aren't friends here. And so like it's kind of like weird how like Nick is like talking to this guy. Um, and so it seems that Nick is being odd or awkward enough to where he is going into a separate room to get a lap dance because like to try to avoid people getting scared off by Nick. Because generally these Santa guys are here because it's a really hard time of year, and like they figure this is the best place to just kind of like meet a bunch of like-minded people that are going through these struggles and bellhopping and whatever to have to go through this kind of job. So we go on and we have Nick getting this dance from this girl, and so he's trying to figure out this case, and so he starts talking about it, and we eventually have this girl who's like, well, if you talk to Mrs. Claus, like if she doesn't know who it is, then like you've gone to the wrong place. So Nick goes off and is to talk to this this one Mrs. Claus about this story. So we have Mrs. Claus with this story about a Santa Claus that had worked at this one department store. And it seems that eventually this guy had worked at this department store and had done possibly some very naughty things to have this guy eventually decide to hang himself in this department store. And so, and I don't exactly have the name of the department store because I forgot what it was, because of course I did. Um, and so we go on, and we of course have Nick, who's like, well, like, since this guy is dead, what is the point of this story? And so Mrs. Claus is like, well, because he had a son. And of course, this guy is to be um, like a really bad guy also, and so it must be like the guy that you're talking about. So we have Sax, who after is to be done talking to Mrs. Claus and how she used to say that she used to ride these poles and used to be really good at it and all this stuff. So Nick goes off and again is to like whip out his dong to take a little pee outside. All of a sudden, we slowly but surely have this big bad Santa Claus, or very bad Santa Claus, go and attack Nick and attack him from nowhere. And this Santa just beats the crap out of Nick because he caught him off guard. So all of a sudden we have it where it seems that the very bad Santa can see Happy, like Nick's and Haley's imaginary friend, and so he goes on and he takes Happy and he swallows him, but then all of a sudden Happy is to try to pull his way back out of this guy's mouth, and so the very bad Santa is to kind of like hurl out Happy. And so while that happens, we all of a sudden have this Santa who is to drop this little fortune cookie thing also from his yakking like sesh. So we now go on and have Nick Sachs thinking, "Ooh, there's a clue here that that we have this kind of fortune cookie like thing." So I want to make sure that everything is technically covered here before I run off within the next possible episode, which I think most question mark is covered. Um, so yeah, so let's just get into the next episode. Kind of a little bit faster than I thought I was going to be to cover some of this stuff. For especially the last episode, but I probably didn't get into everything anyways, so that is what it is. Like we had the one point when Nick Sachs was going and still driving that little car that he mentioned that he like has a bunch of kind of things in there, and he ends up like flipping the car, and he now has to figure out how he can get out of the car, and so I kind of thought that that was kind of funny for that episode. So for this other episode, I'm going to mention something that is to just kind of be a random scene that doesn't really have much of anything to do with the rest of the episode. So I can easily go and talk about that. So we end up having this one salesman that is to go door to door and is to mention about the good word, so to speak. The salesman is going on and on about the good word. And so I'm trying to figure out here where the heck this salesman guy is because I can't find him anywhere. I guess it really doesn't matter anyways. All right, let's cue it up here. So we have the salesman going to door to door saying like, "Hey, have you ever heard of the good word?" So all of a sudden we have Smoothie who's like, "Yeah, like, you know what, I haven't heard about the good word, but hey, come on in and just explain it to me." And then all of a sudden, we end up finding out Smoothie is later going and kind of dipping Meredith's mother into some chemicals that are to make her hands look younger. But also, he is to tell us that if you put this thing up this woman's nose, this chemical, that'll probably, like, it'll kill her. Um, and so I guess that's why this guy has this. So we go on and we have Smoothie, who is to put some headphones and have, uh, of course, Meredith's mother watch the Battle of the Suxes. And so we go on and we have Smoothie, who is to go and have this salesman in the bathroom, just kind of all like taped and chained up, and he goes through and he's gonna take care of him. He's gonna murder him because he needs his own quiet time because he spends so much time with this woman. So in this episode, we also have Mr. Blue that is to have some time with a guy named Mr. Bug. And so we, of course, have Mr. Bug kind of questioning Mr. Blue about the whole Santa thing and how the Bug thinks that he can't trust Mr. Blue having the Santa guy with these kids, and that maybe they need to go on and transition them elsewhere because like these kids are really important. So really that's to be a bulk of that dialogue exchange between the two of them. But we also have this Bug who's explaining about how a bug likes darkness, but then is to be find the light also appealing. And Mr. Blue is like, okay, this guy is just weird. And so after Mr. Bug is done talking with, of course, Mr. Blue, he goes off into this room, and Mr. Blue is just kind of baffled by this kind of like whips and chains and all these things that he's to see in this kind of like very S&M like room. So we go on here further into this episode now, kind of having all those loose ends technically covered here. Let's cover everything else. So we of course have this Battle of the Suxes show where we have a bunch of these like gangster women, let's just say, or mafia tied women that are to all mention about like their families or their loved ones possibly dying at some point. And I guess there's this reality show going on where we have a bunch of these wives that are at some point in the shower just like showering it up. And I'm like, whoa, okay, all right, like this is this kind of show. And so we go on and we have, of course, Isabella Scalamucci, who is to talk about her two sons dying recently. And so we find out that Isabella is to be consistently talking to Mr. Blue and wanting to figure out like how did her like sons die. And so as she was to try to figure out like how her sons were to die and who is going to be to blame to this, we eventually have her figure out in the morgue that Mikey's body isn't with the rest of these two other Scalamucci's. And so she's like, okay, why isn't this body like here with theirs? But Isabella is going on and asking Mr. Blue why like her sons have not been brought to justice just yet. And Mr. Blue is going on and telling her, it's like, well, maybe the reason why your sons are dead is because of some karma that is coming back around to you now. And maybe it's not like my fault. Maybe it's not the hitman's fault. Maybe it's just your fault that your sons had died because of some karma thing that like, he's trying to like reverse it all around to just say that that her sons died because of her instead of him or anybody else, not even the person that killed of course these people. So because Isabella is talking to Mr. Blue while they're having this like family like dinner, and we have Mr. Blue's face while on this TV screen that's consistently blurred out, and so we go on and we have these guys who are putting together this TV show and covering them. And Mr. Blue is like, "Why are you on this reality show? Why are you teaming up with these vultures?" And like Isabella's like, "Well, hey, I'm having them cover every like step of my life." And we just consistently have like Mr. Blue every time he's with Isabella, like kind of making a joke about these TV guys where they're a virus, and he is to mention out of all the things that he could have ever done, like the one thing that he would never do is be on a reality show because it's a virus and like it's a horrible thing. But it's kind of this funny like meta kind of thing where we have these characters kind of like now acting to a camera that is legitimately there at some point. But anyways, so in how we have these characters and how we have this director of this show wanting more out of these people and kind of like, okay, like, come on, give us more. And Mr. Blue is like, don't even wave your finger at me. I will break that off. so, so we go on and we have Isabella, who of course is to go to this elderly old woman, who I guess is to have this possible magical power within her. And man, is there a lot of just characters in this one. Um, but she ends up going. Isabella ends up going to this elder to um, try to get answers, and so she ends up getting this mark over her forehead, and she ends up going on to have this woman like speaking Italian, and we end up finding out where like the key to Isabella's son's death is with Mikey, and so then Isabella has to go and try to find Mikey, realizing that Mikey's body is gone. So we go on here and we now have Nick Sachs following the trail of blood, uh, trail of crumbs with the whole like Chinese fortune cookie thing. And so he goes on to this fortune cookie manufacturer, which I believe is a girl named Elizabeth. And so we go on and we are to go to a girl named Elizabeth. And so she, of course, is to tell us that these fortune cookies are, of course, to be needing to find their owner instead of it just being this like kind of random thing of sorts. It's like, oh no, like this fortune cookie is perfectly to find their person that is to tell them their fortune. And Nick Sachs is like I don't believe that at all. And so we have Elizabeth telling Sachs, it's like, well, hey, like, do you think that this stuff really isn't true unless I've taken over numerous things and I'm going after Delaware next? And Sachs is like, I am rock hard right now. Like when this girl is kind of establishing and kind of intimidating Sachs. So we go on and we have, of course, Elizabeth going and telling Sachs where to go next, which is to be some restaurant. And so Sachs goes on and, of course, is to meet this one waitress. And so that woman is to all of a sudden be speaking Mandarin. And so luckily it seems that Happy is to be able to speak Mandarin. And so we had this kind of offensive thing going on here where it doesn't seem like this is actually real Mandarin here. And so we just have these people kind of just saying Mandarin-like words, it seems. But it seems that at the end of the day, there's subtitles and you can see what they're saying. And that eventually it has us go off to have Sax go and meet this one kind of dealer, but also deliverer of these guys' food. Um, so we go on here and we have these two other twins that, of course, are to make their way, of course, to this environment. I think they're called the Ping Pong twins, or I think they're called. Um, One of them I think is called, like, maybe they're called the Ping twins. I don't know. Let me pause here for 1 second. All right. Well, I guess from a lack of information, we'll go with that. So we have, of course, uh, the delivery boy going and giving Sax some kind of joint, but then also telling him about the Santa guy and how he's delivering these like massive amounts of food. And we also had Sax, who had this fish that was kind of half alive, half dead. And so Sax goes and I guess tears through the middle of it. And Happy's like, "How could you have done that?" And Sax is like, "Well, it's the only humane thing to do." So this delivery boy goes and tells, of course, Sax like the kind of like roughly the address of where this thing is, and I think the department store is called Gimbal or Kimball. I think it starts with a G. It's like Gimbal or it's like Gamble. I think it possibly is Gimbal. I'm not quite sure. Um, so correct me. You can go through the thing and say what the actual name of was, because heaven forbid I remember everything. So we go on and really we want Nyx that's really pushing to just say like, "Hey, I'm gonna break your arm off if you don't show me or like tell me exactly where this thing is." But while Sax is to figure out where this department store is, we then have him leave, and we consistently have Sax here that's kind of afraid of being in Chinatown, and I guess we eventually find out why. So these twins are coming on to attack Sax because he's kind of leery that there's going to be somebody here that's going to go and beat the crap out of him. And so we go on and we have 5 different guys that all appear. And so Sax is like, "Well, hey, if you guys would have had one more, I would have gotten an egg roll for free." They're like, "Ah, you racist." Like, well, whatever. So we have one guy just start like karateing it up. He's doing all this like technique, kicking, and he's doing all this like shadow boxing right in front of Nick, and he's doing all this stuff, this karate. And so I'm thinking, is this gonna be like the Indiana Jones scenario where we have the guy with the swords and he's swinging them all around, and then Harrison is to just grab this gun and pow and kill the guy? Surefire enough. So we go on and we have this guy that's kicking and punching and shadowboxing in front of Nick, and Nick just goes and smacks him in the Johnson and has him fall over. So we go on and we have Nick, who's doing a really good job at taking all these guys out, until he eventually goes on and is to breach the main guy, who's to be Ping, and he's to have these like nunchucks, and it seems that Ping is doing a pretty good job at like beating up Nick pretty well. And you would have thought Nick at some point would have just popped out this gun and would have shot this guy. Like, yeah, I just didn't want to waste the bullets on you people. I had this gun the whole time, but I just didn't want to waste the bullets. So because what ends up happening is Nick is to get a bat away from one of these guys, but then when Nick is to try to bat, of course, Ping grabs it and is to start now doing both the bat and the nunchucks all at the same time. I'm like, man, that's kind of complex. Bravo to this guy. So, because he's kind of doing the same movements as he's doing with the nunchucks with this bat, and I thought that was kind of impressive. So, but we go on and have Happy telling Sax about this kind of fire escape. So Sax goes on and takes his fire escape and gets the heck out of there to be on this rooftop. And I'm like, wait a minute. Like, now when we see Sax next, it's like, I thought like what happened there before was during the day. Now we transitioned and now it's nighttime. That's kind of weird. So we go on and we have Sax, who is now roaming through the rooftops during the night, trying to figure out where the heck this building is. And so he's going through and trying to figure things out, but he just gives up. He goes on this rooftop. It's like, I have no clue where we are. Like, I am so freaking lost. Like, you would think that, like, Nick would pop down somewhere and just ask for directions. But I guess he's not that kind of guy. So we go on and we have, of course, Happy here that's not wanting to give up. And so he's starting to do this like happy dance. And he's just kind of like clopping and clipping and clopping. He's like, yeah, I'm going to do this dance now. And so Sax is just kind of like, oh my God. So because Happy is to want to do this like hope dance, and so Sax is like, really, like, oh my God. But all of a sudden, once Happy does do this hope dance, all of a sudden they figure out where the building is, and they're like, oh my God, it's right there. So they go on and they stumble onto this building, and they're kind of slowly but surely making their way in here, to all of a sudden have it where Sax is beating up Meredith, not realizing it, and so is Meredith beating up Sax. And so to the point of them almost grabbing scissors, and Sax is getting stabbed in the leg, and Sax is like, oh, you stabbed my good leg. And he falls over. So we now have, of course, Sax realizing that it's Meredith, and so uh, he goes on to try to open up all these boxes to realize there's no kids in these boxes, and so we find out that this Santa had gone on and tied up all of these kids into this one vehicle and is transporting them to another location. And so I'm like, okay, so like that's how we kind of finish off on this second episode, or this other episode, episode 4. So with that said, I kind of quickly covered a lot of this other stuff. I covered a lot of ground here. Oh, Amanda. Amanda and Meredith at some point were going and finding out that at one of the houses that this paper or this letter or this thing was to be delivered to this one family. And so now they're going and taking this courier and asking him like, well, hey, like, what do you really want to be? And he's like a piano guy. And so they're like, okay, great, because we're going to stick your hand into this back of this motorcycle and tell you that if you don't give us information, you're gonna lose this hand, and you're gonna have to play chopsticks with using chopsticks. So the courier ends up going and telling the girls, of course, where he had gotten this message from. And so that's how Meredith is to make her way into that hideout, to make it, of course, to find Sax there and beat him up, not thinking of who this actually is. So I think with that, I feel that most of this is covered. Question mark. Like, I feel good about it. I feel relieved that I can otherwise go through and cover more of this in the next iteration of this. So with that said, I think I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy. Hopefully everything's covered. These, like, even though this is a weird dark show, I can still get something out of it. It may not be like, it might be a weird kind of fun, but it's still fun nonetheless. So with that said, I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.